I'm glad you've stuck with me so far. So far, we've done a lot of work writing a lot of endpoints. We've created our, database layer where we've written queries. These are referred to sometimes as models or helpers. Um, and we have an index file that has set up a server and has listened and is also doing all this stuff. Matter of fact, is this index file, is overwhelmed. It's overworked, and we need to start to parse our code base into a much more workable code base. Because after all, we only have two tables that we've created, and look at already all all the code that we've written in one file. In the real world, you are going to come across uh, hundreds of tables, and each of those tables themselves will have all the four CRUD operations for each table. So it quickly compounds out of control if you're going to try to stick all of those endpoints into one table. So what we need to do is we need to start to manipulate our code base into something that's much more in line with industry standards. And we need to talk about routing. So, what is routing? Routing is simply a way, it's probably the main feature of Express. Uh, it's a way of breaking our resources, which are these routes here, into their own logical files. So right now we have primarily one resource, these API/lessons, but at the bottom we have a different resource. We have an API/messages. And imagine, just to go with the theme of the tables we've written so far, imagine we had an API/faculty, an API/students, an API/supplies, then maybe an API/bookstore, and on and on and on. And you can see, and that's just for a very simple business model. Imagine some of the businesses, their model could be very complex indeed. And you will be writing endpoints and CRUD operations for literally hundreds and hundreds of different tables. So right now we only have two tables, and this file is quite large. So I've written it to teach. I've put it all in one file just to basically teach you how Express works and how to set it up. But what we're going to do now is we're going to start breaking up our code base into something much more in line with industry standards. And so in order to do that, um, we're going to start to clean up this index file and make this index file only really be concerned with setting up the server to listen. And so in order to do that, first thing we're going to do is we're going to go to this port, and I'm going to move this. I'm going to cut that out, and I'm going to move it down to the bottom, right above listening. Right there. I'm going to move it right there. And all the rest of this, I am going to cut. I'm going to cut it out. I'm going to copy it. And I'm going to go and create a new folder called API. And in that folder, we're going to create a new file called server.js. And in there, we're going to paste what we just cut. So all we've done so far is we've basically we've made the index file just be about the concern of setting up the server to listen on a particular port. But it still needs access to this server, which is defined over here. So we need to import this file. So const server equals require, and we got to set it up to the path to the API. And to API and to the server. Let's save that. And now the server, since we imported it into here, we need to export it. And that means we need to go down to the bottom Now that we broke it out, we need to make it available to the index file. And we export a file in Express and in Node using module.exports equals server. It's this, right? What we've declared. Server. Let's clean this up. So let's save that. All right, let's see. Module.export server. And this crashed over here because one of our helpers, now the path to our helper, now that we move this out and set it up into this folder in this file, this path right here is no longer correct. So we need to go, I think we just need to add a dot. We need to go up a level, and I think that's correct. Now let's save it, and our server should start up again. There we go. So far we've moved most of the code out of index. We've just left the listen and the port, and now we've imported the new file we created, and down at the bottom we exported it, and we've corrected the path to our helpers. So that's the first sort of division of concerns. But now there's another division that we can make to make things cleaner. This server file is also doing double things. It's setting up a server, it's setting up Express, and setting it and telling it how to parse JSON, and testing it out with the home route, and then it's also and then it goes right into all these different endpoints having to do with lessons. So what we need to do is we need to make these endpoints, anything having to do with these endpoints, which are resources, we need to separate those out into their own file as well. And to do that, we're going to create a new folder. We're going to call it routes. Oh, I think I might have one already. Do I have a folder called routes? Oh, I do have a folder called route. Let me delete it so I can recreate it again. So I'm going to create a new folder. I'm going to call it routes. And then I'm going to create in this folder a file that will have something to do with these particular routes, lessons. So in here I'm going to create a new file. I'm going to call them lessons routes.js. And these lessons are going to have everything to do with just these API lessons. So let's copy every endpoint that has API/lessons in it, and let's move it to that new file. So the messages is different. See, it doesn't have API lessons. And so I'm going to cut this out, and I'm going to move this, give myself a couple of spots at the top to that new file. Let's go back to server real quick here, and let's look and see what we got here. Let's clean this up. Okay, this new routes file is going to need Express, and it's going to need access to the models. So I'm going to copy, not cut, that and put that up at the top of our new file. This new file needs access to Express, and it needs access to the database helper files we wrote because it's still calling these database functions. And because we've separated this file out, we need to export it. And we do that at the bottom. Well, before we export it, we need to create, this is the new part. Since we separated it out, we need to say const router equals express dot with a capital R, O-U-T-E-R, and then we need to instantiate it or invoke it. The capital R and the double parentheses are vital. This is a method that comes with Express. It's probably Express's primary feature. It's setting up routes. And now that we set this up, we no longer refer to each of these endpoints with server.get, 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 server.delete. We're going to refer to them by this new name that we set right here, router. And so we're going to change each of these servers. So I think on my Mac I can just hit Control D and highlight them all and then delete them and put router. Now we have router. So what we did is we moved all those endpoints, anyone having to do with API/lessons, which are resources having to do with their own concern. They're all endpoints having to do with lessons. And they are all preceded with the same /API/lessons. We move those to their own file. And in their own file, we didn't say const server equals express because we've already set that up over here. We've basically said const router equals express, and then we've invoked an express method called router that enables us to kind of split these routes, peel them off, if you will, of the server, of the way we did it here. And because we have separated them into their own file, we need to export them down at the bottom so we can import them into server. So let's export them down at the bottom now. Module.exports equals router. Now let's save that file. And we'll come back to this file. Now that we've exported them out of here, we need to import them into server so server can use them. If it's not clear, stick with me. It'll become clear, I promise. So now we are going to import const. We're going to call them lessons router equals require, and then the path to the lessons routes. So we're going to say, no, we need to go up a level. We need to go to routes / lessons routes. And so now the lessons routes file has been successfully separated out into its own file and exported into server. But now server needs to make use of them. And I'll show you how to make use of them. But first, I'm going to separate these API messages out into their own file. Because what I want is a server file to be all about setting up the server. In Index, it's all about getting the server to listen and specifying the port, and then bringing in this server file here that we set up. But this server file is still kind of confused. It's kind of doing some message stuff, and it's also setting up a server. So let's go do similar with what we did with the lessons with the messages. So let's set up a new messages route. So in routes, let's create a new file called messages routes.js. And let's go to the lessons route and let's copy these top 3 lines because those are going to be needed. It needs express. It needs access to our helper query files that we wrote because it's going to interact with that. And it's setting up a router. And now let's go back to the server. And now what we can do is we can go to this message, cut that out, and paste that right in here. And because we're calling it router, we got to change this right here to router. And then we need to export it. We can save that file. And now look at what we've done. We used to have, in first, everything was all in Index, and then we kind of did a little split, and now we split off a server. Everything that doesn't really have to do with setting up the server. Matter of fact is we don't need the helpers anymore. The helpers were required when we were interacting with the database, but the server file is no longer interacting with the database directly. And now we have separated into two files our different concerns. Anything concerning the AP/API/messages is going to be in this file. Matter of fact, as we didn't finish, we could have written a patch or a put endpoint to update a message. So anything having to do with this endpoint /API/messages is going to be contained in this file. Anything having to do with lessons routes is going to be in this file. And if we had a faculty table in our schema, if we had a faculty table and then a students table and then a bookstore table and on and on and on, they would each be contained in their own routes file, nice and clean. The file isn't going to be too large. It's going to contain at the most all of the CRUD operations for that particular resource. Nice and clean. And so now that we have, we forgot to bring in our messages right here. So let's do const messages router equals require routes / messages routes. And so now that we've required them, we still haven't taught the server how to use them. And so in order to teach the server how to use them, we're going to go underneath this home endpoint. That's basically, we can leave that in this file because this is basically our sort of primal endpoint that lets us know that the server is up and running. We're going to teach the server how to use these two routes by simply saying server.use. And in here it takes two arguments: what resource path and then what file you want to load when that resource path is hidden. So right now we're going to say /API/lessons. Whenever the server listens and a resource comes in, localhost 5000 /API/lessons, it's going to go, I know what to do with that. I'm going to direct you to this resource, and I'm going to send you here to be fulfilled. Likewise, server.use /API/messages, anything coming in under the URL with a /API/messages, I'm going to send you to the messages router for fulfillment. And look how nice and clean our server file has become. Our index file is just set up to listen, and it imports the server right here that we've set up. We've set up an express server. We've imported whatever routes we need. If we get 100 more tables, we just stick all of those in here. And then we set up our server. We taught it how to parse JSON. We set up a basic home route just to test if the server's up and running. And then we said for each of these routes that you've set up in separate files, this is how you use them. Whenever a URL path is entered here, go to this file for fulfillment. Whenever this happens, go to this for fulfillment. And this is kind of the hallmark of a RESTful architecture. I know Firebase and GraphQL, they do things much differently, but this is sort of the bedrock of sort of a bit of the REST architecture here. And so there's one more change. This isn't going to work still, and there's one more change that we have to make, and then everything is going to work. So let me save this file first. Right now, our server is listening for anything that comes in with a /API/lessons. And if so, it's going to send this string to this router. So let's go to this router. And then it encounters this string again. But this string is redundant. think of each of these endpoints in here, all of these endpoints in here, as already having this /API/lessons already written in it. So let's just say um, all endpoints are for /API/lessons, and then anything follows. So since we have already told it /API/lessons, we don't need to say it again. Matter of fact, is it wouldn't work. So we take out everything except for the slash. Think of this as already having these /API/lessons in it by virtue of the server using it and saying, whenever you go to this lessons router, precede it with this. And so because of that, we don't need that. Same thing here. We can take away anything API lessons, we can take away. Now with this, we have to leave the /ID, but think of this as automatically having /API/lessons and then whatever follows. That's how each of these works. This endpoints assume it to be /API/lessons/ and then I think you get what I mean here. And so let's just clean this up. Same thing here. Anything that's API lessons, it's redundant. It's already been listed in the server.use statement. And right here, this one here. Now we can save this file. And let's go to the messages and do the same, because in the server, anything with API/messages is considered already to be put into the endpoint ahead of time. So we can take away this part of it and just leave the /ID. Now, everything is set up correctly. We have an index file that has just to do with listening. We have a server that just basically sets up the server and then sets up any of the resources that it needs access to. If we get 5 more routes, we just include the routes right here and then use them. Nice and clean. I hope you see how really nice this this code base has become. It's very clean and very easy. If someone says, hey, I need you to go look at the lessons routes and do such and such change. Well, you don't have to comb through one big massive file. You can just go to this one file and go, oh, it's got to be in the lessons routes. And then you go find your work and it's just going to be in here and this file won't get really large. So now let's give this a test drive. I've noticed that the server's still running. We have our server, we've brought in our routes, we've taught it how to use it, and we've adjusted each of our routes to be router, and we've taken away the superfluous leading. Let's just make a note here for the messages. For all endpoints starting with /API/messages. There we go. So let's save that and let's go to Insomnia or Postman and take this for a test drive. Let's make sure this works. So let me do a get and just see what I got on my database. I was doing some testing, so I added a couple more. I think you have these 3. Let's try to add a new one. Let's just try to go to Post and add a new let's add a Redux course. Send. Now let's do a get. Make sure that that Redux course comes in, and there it is on the end. Beautiful. That seems to be working good. But what about our messages? Remember, we broke up our message into a separate table. Let's go add a message. Let's go. Let's say Mary makes the comment that I prefer context over Redux. Maybe context with capital C, context over Redux. Let's send that. But that seems to work. Let's get our messages, see if that, everything seems to be working. Let's actually remove a message because that was the only one that we broke out to its own, if you recall, its own router file was the delete message. So let's try to delete message ID number 5 here, the what Mary just said. So let's just say remove message, and we're going to delete message number 5. And it seems to work. Let's do get, and that should be gone. And bingo, it's gone. Well, I hope you were able to follow that. That was kind of a complicated lesson. We really reorganized our code base, but it's in much better shape, a lot cleaner. We have a clean index file, a clean server file. We have routes that have to do with their own concern. This code base is much easier to reason about and to work with. And in our next lesson, we're going to be talking about deployment to Heroku. That's because Heroku is free. And one of the things, probably because Heroku is free, is it doesn't provide very good support for SQLite. The data does not persist. It gets wiped out randomly. So, but Heroku does provide a Postgres, database module for free. And so what we're going to be doing in our next lesson is we're going to be working with this code base, making a couple changes so that it can be deployed to Heroku. And we're going to be doing some changes in our connects file. And I hope you join me in the next video. It should be fun. Thank you.